Hello, and you're very welcome to the JMac podcast. I'm John Mann, and of course, this podcast is sponsored by Orgarich.com and Atak.ie. Use the promo code JMac podcast to get 15% off on Orgarich.com and get the best skins, gloves, and equipment on Atak.ie. Be attack minded. And if you're liking what you're seeing, like and subscribe on YouTube because the sport has been absolutely brilliant so far. And tonight, I'm joined by Ewan McKenna, a man that needs very, very little introduction, but I'll do so. He is the author of 5 great books. He was once the Sports Writer of the Year, and he is the host of Think for Yourself podcast out there at the minute. So get your ears into it. It's a great listen. So Ewan, how are you keeping?
Excellent. You're keeping me from divilment this Wednesday, and this is take 2, by the way, for people, because I'm an idiot when it comes to technology. So I'm repeating what I said a few minutes ago.
Brilliant stuff. And how's well, I suppose I'll ask you again for the ones that have not aired, but how are you keeping you in you're out in Lisbon, Porto at the minute?
Porto, just south. I could give you a completely different answer, but no, I'm very well. The summer is back here, so I can't complain after watching that weather at home on Sunday, watching the GAA.
Desperate, definitely. I suppose it is great to be back. I suppose how's life out there? Like you're working out at the minute, and obviously your podcast is flying. So what are you working at, or how are you keeping yourself sane? I suppose.
Good. Well, yeah, the podcast is quite busy, and I'm delighted actually. It's only 4 episodes in, but it's done really well, and I'm trying to bring something different to people because I feel the media has kind of failed around a lot of issues away from sport the last couple of years. So I'm trying to pick up the slack there. And I'm just starting into a new book, which I hope is out at the end of this year as well, called 1972, which obviously was the worst year of the Troubles, murder-wise in the north. But I want to take the hurling and football championships in Ulster that summer, which went ahead even when teams wouldn't come to Dublin to play rugby in the Five Nations, and tell the story of that summer through the eyes of those 2 championships, the people involved in them, the players, the fans, the RUC on duty, the army, everybody. So, yeah, it's going to be a lot of work, but it's something I've wanted to do for a while, and it crept up on me. And then I kind of thought, Jesus, it's 2022, 50 years. So A, you need to be hitting the anniversary, and B, while a terrible thing to say, given it's 50 years ago, a lot of these people aren't going to be around for a lot more. So I want to kind of put their stories on record.
Absolutely. And I suppose how much kind of work, and I suppose we could touch on a couple of minutes, goes into writing all these books, Ewan, because obviously you released Oisin McConville's book a long pretty time ago now, but how much work does go into all these kind of books and the ins and outs? And obviously you're the author of the Chaos is a friend of mine as well, so obviously a great publication, but there's a lot of time that goes into all this.
Yeah, I suppose with the autobiographies, when you're a ghostwriter, it's a little bit less because you're relying on someone else. Now, that can be a good or a bad thing. I mean, if someone isn't willing to talk, it can be an awful trudge to try and fill out 250 pages around someone who is just in it for the money, say. But then someone like Oisin McConville who wanted to tell everything, and those around him, he told them to tell everything. When it's kind of words and all, it comes easier. This one, it's going to be a lot because it is a social history. It's not one person. It's going to be 150 interviews. It's going to be back through the archives in the National Library of Papers. And so, yeah, it's going to take up a lot of time, but I hope it's out kind of maybe next November, all going well. And then I can kind of put my feet up for Christmas and say I've done something well.
Super. I suppose how's life? I suppose out there, and obviously with the COVID and everything that's going on, you and obviously you're a Kildare man. So, how's life? Has this kind of COVID changed your perspective for much? And obviously life probably is going to change for a lot of people and has changed, and for the better and the worse. But has it changed your perspective much, things, Ewan?
Yeah, I mean, I found it hard to tune into sport and take it seriously as a be-all and end-all, which is my career up to that, because so much has gone on. I guess everything has been so divisive. It's been so angry. It's been a kind of a culture war. And at the end of all that, it was particularly hard to go and watch a game of GAA in an empty Croke Park on television when you can hear the players roaring at each other and the seagulls shitting on the seats. But you know what? Last Saturday and Sunday, because things are slowly getting back to normal, and it'll take a long, long time, and there's a lot of wounds to heal and a lot of accountability needed, it was lovely to sit down and watch Dublin picked apart. It was lovely to see. It was lovely to see Newbridge absolutely packed, and Kildare coming back from 4 points down and holding Kerry scoreless for 20 minutes. I know it's only January, but being a Kildare fan, we'll celebrate those things. And it was just, it was nice to take the whole day, and kind of, even because of the weather and because I have a theory that Tyrone people walk around looking for fights all day in real life, not just in GAA. Their match at Monaghan was a bit of a battle. I mean, I was waiting to walk the dog, and I couldn't go. I was kind of 10 more minutes, and then I ended up watching the lot of it because it was bloody exciting. And obviously Donegal and Mayo in those conditions were exciting from what we could see as well. So yeah, no, it was great. It was the first time it felt it was truly back, not with a 40% crowd, not with worries about, oh, well, will that change in a couple of weeks? Not with other worries. It felt itself for the first time in a long time, which was great.
Yeah, God, you're speaking for the masses there. I think it is great to be back in Erin. Obviously, I got down to Carrick-on-Shannon on Sunday, so that's where dreams are made, Ewan.
It is.
But I suppose, are you impressed by the action at the minute? And obviously, Tyrone did win the All-Ireland last year, 2021, and I just wouldn't mind hearing maybe your perspective of maybe Tyrone's All-Ireland win last year, because obviously I know there was kind of COVID rumours stricken and bits and pieces, and no doubt you had views in the COVID scenario. So maybe what was your view on last year, Tyrone's All-Ireland success?
It was kind of weird. I mean, you can't take away from anyone winning an All-Ireland. I mean, I'd give my left arm for Kildare to win one after all these years. But even, I guess it was with everything else going on, and even the year before, to see Dublin go and win one more and break the record, and that early goal against Mayo, quickest ever in an All-Ireland final, it just felt kind of surreal, and it didn't feel itself in a lot of ways. Like that should have been, the year before should have been the Hill going absolutely berserk, and instead it was kind of, you could hear the ball rattling the net. You were looking at the Hill covered in an AIB, in a Super Value, in a Centra banner or whatever else. You could hear the players roaring at each other. That was obviously a little bit different last year. Yeah, it was a hard one because there was the COVID stuff with Tyrone and the postponement. And I guess, look, they weren't the only ones. Everyone was going to use this situation. Dublin used that situation when they were training against a ban. It just, I don't know, maybe I'm sure people from Tyrone will go, bollocks, it was a great day, we loved it. And of course it was for them. It just didn't feel like the real thing quite yet, where now it does. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. It just didn't feel like everything was back, and there was too much other stuff going on, and COVID was a problem within GAA, and yeah, it just kind of felt like 3/4 of an All-Ireland rather than a full win.
I suppose, yeah, Ewan, and obviously, like, you feel like the kind of GAA is in a good place, and obviously we're back in earnest now, and obviously Dublin's dominance seems to be at an end. I just wouldn't count me chickens with that just yet. They could rip roar on Saturday against Kerry, but do you feel the GAA generally is in a good place, obviously, with everything kind of going on?
I still think Dublin are a problem, and you know what, people will say, well, they lost last year, therefore it's over. I think the fact that they've won 6 or 7 All-Irelands and only lost one All-Ireland semi-final in all that time shows how dominant they are, rather than the loss showing the opposite. I think the fact that people are jumping on the first game of the league in January and going, oh, look, they're beatable, I think that shows how far they are ahead, because no one else is getting excited about Kerry drawing in Kildare or Donegal and Mayo not winning their first match. I think people are looking for something to cling on to. Now, Dessie Farrell is a problem. We know that. I actually, and people laughed and said it was hyperbolic. I thought he should have been sacked after the semi-final last year for 2 reasons. One, the way he hung the players out to dry over that training session and didn't own up and take responsibility, regardless of how much he was behind it as a manager, and protected his players. And I think the camp didn't particularly like him for that. And I think you'd have to look at where Paul Mannion and Cloxton and others went in the meantime after that. The other reason Dublin have so many advantages, that I think it's such a beneficial gig that comes with so much going for it. Every manager would love it. And you're probably going to win a lot of All-Irelands, that when you don't, the downside has to be, well, where did it go wrong? I mean, and they didn't even get to the final. I mean, there's no way Mayo should be getting within a mile of Dublin at this stage of the Mayo cycle. What Mayo were doing 4 or 5 years ago was amazing, but they were a much better team. But I still think that's an issue. I wouldn't be writing Dublin off yet. I mean, Dublin are, what are we looking at? If they won 16 or 17 Leinster still, they're going to win Leinster again this year. They'll be back in an All-Ireland semi-final this year. I don't know, will it be Ulster or Munster they'll meet in the semi-final this year? I'm not sure, I haven't looked at it. But I mean, you'd still have them in the top 2 or 3. And when Dublin are with an ailing manager, missing a couple of key players and having a bad year, and they're still going to be probably in a final, that shows how strong they are. And I've said it the last few years that if Dublin weren't in it, Mayo probably would have won a couple of All-Irelands. Tyrone might have won a couple more. But it would have left a lot of other counties fancying themselves a lot more. The likes of Kildare and Meath might have put in a bigger effort knowing that they stood a chance. The same Galway might have fancied it. Roscommon might have fancied a run. Monaghan, Donegal, all these teams.
Cavan.
Well, you might well have been in a final.
Yeah. Maybe 2020 if Dublin let us beat them. But the other ideas that night, Ewan, and I had to just get your opinion on obviously Stephen Cloxton stepping away, and obviously all the outcry and emotion, and like we still don't even know if he's fully retired yet, but we can only just presume he is gone at this point. But I suppose your take, maybe no statement, Dessie Farrell being up in the air about it. So even that situation itself, Ewan, and caused a lot of debate.
I don't think I was happy there. But then it's Cloxton. And you know what? I would never be able to analyse a match like Oisin McConville or Colin Parkinson or Michael Foley in the Sunday Times or Kieran Shannon in the Examiner. I don't know how well the Cork wingbacks are this year or how they're going or their faults. I was always drawn to characters and issues within the GAA. So Dublin Funding was obviously an issue. But when it came to characters, Cloxton is a loss because he's such an oddball. And I mean that as a compliment. How a person who achieves all that and completely redefines how football is played and wins all those All-Irelands, all those Leinsters, and across all that time doesn't grow any sort of an ego to the point he actually wants to talk to the media, to the point he wants to make a few quid on the side, to the point he wants to write an autobiography or jump in some bloody ad for AIB or whatever else and make himself a little bit of money. That fascinates me. And it kind of makes him stepping away so hard to tell, because maybe he was bored of it. Maybe he realised there's nothing else to win. Or maybe he doesn't like Dessie Farrell. Who knows? And maybe we never will. Only those close to him might, and I'm not even sure if he'd tell them.
Bananas. And do you think maybe it was the kind of the COVID breach, and obviously we were hearing maybe the drop in standards, and obviously Dublin going ahead with that kind of COVID breach, the training, let you feel maybe that was the issue? Is it a lack of respect for Dessie Farrell, or do you feel that Dessie Farrell has the dressing room at the minute? No,
I don't think he does. I think other players might still be around. They might have kept going a little bit longer. And I don't think it was just, as I say, the idea that they did breach training, and by God, they weren't the only ones. But it was his reaction to getting caught. His reaction as a leader to not taking the bullets for his players, to protecting them, because he did the opposite. He kind of hung them out to dry. He hung others out to dry, and I don't think Pat Gilroy or Jim Gavin would ever have allowed any of his players to be hung out to dry.
Last man, and obviously you look out for the characters and the bit of lads, maybe risk takers within the GA, and Dublin. He always intrigues me. He's doing a bit of work for Boyle Sports and Booker Bar at the minute. Jeremy Connolly, Ewan, what's your take on that man?
Who?
Jeremy Connolly.
I have not come across Jeremy Connolly. Oh, Jeremy Connolly. Jeez, it's your Cavan accent. I said Jeremy Connolly. Fuck me.
You had a Cavan man up in Kildare before. You should be used to our accents.
He was North Kildare swinging around the stick, you know. I won't blame your Cavan accent. I'll blame me listening to Portuguese for the last decade. João McConnelly. Do you know what? He was never going to be missed as much as Cloxton. And he was kind of the opposite of Cloxton, in that Cloxton redefined the role, whereas Connolly had moments of genius, which were kind of in an instant, whereas Cloxton's impact was throughout a game. Cloxton kept his head down, Connolly couldn't. And look, there were off-field incidents, and I believe he was provoked a couple of times in a bar, and I no one deserves that. But there was always a nasty streak to him. I remember him dropping his knees into the back of a Kildare player on the ground, into the back of his head during a Byrne Cup match. It's on YouTube, and he could have fractured the guy's skull. And Dublin were winning, and it was a nothing match. And the fact he still had those impulses, and it was always something that could take away from his team as well. Cloxton was never going to let Dublin down, and it wasn't just about missing a free. Cloxton was never going to run out and box someone in the head or drop the knees into someone.
It's Mac here.
Whereas Connolly could. I mean, Connolly you didn't know, and Gavin wanted reliability. I think it wasn't good enough having a guy who could kick 4 points in the sideline or get put off. He wanted someone who was going to do what he said as part of a game plan that made you win. And Connolly was kind of a throwback to an erratic Dublin who could beat you by 10 points or just not show up. And there was something like that. So, I mean, he obviously was a genius, not reliable enough and not consistent enough as a Colm Cooper or the best forwards or Kieran McManus or whoever. But yeah, look, it is what it is. I mean, I wouldn't have him near the top of that Dublin team in terms of what they achieved. I think he needed stable figures behind him who were always going to be 9 out of 10 performers, so he could have his 10 out of 10 day every so often.
Definitely. Obviously, you're kind of touching on like the funding. Obviously, I don't want to make it this like a Dublin dedicated podcast, but obviously you were kind of strong in your views about the funding that Dublin were getting and probably still are getting to this point, and compared to other counties, Ewan, I suppose a few minutes on this, and I suppose your thought process and all that.
Well, go through the figures, right? If you go back 2005 to 2009, 5 million was given to Dublin through the Irish Sports Council from the Irish taxpayer for games development projects. Mayo, who they've closest to them year after year until Tyrone last year, it would have taken them 116 years to get that funding at that rate. You go 2010 to 2014 when Dublin were sowing the seeds for this. Per registered player, Mayo were getting around €22, Tyrone 21, Kerry 19. Dublin were getting €274.40 per registered player. And the point of it is, well, the game needs to grow in Dublin. And around 2.9% of the population of Dublin are lining out for teams or registered players. And that's against around 7.5 in Munster, I think 7.7 in Ulster's nationalist community, about 8.16 in Connacht and about 8.6 in the rest of Leinster. And that's fine, grow the game. But if you grow to the extent where it's the same as the rest of Leinster, that's an extra 70,500 players Dublin will have to pick from. And that's about twice as many as Kerry, Mayo and Tyrone combined. So you can't both grow the game in Dublin, which is, of course, the purpose of the GAA, but then also let them field one team. And you go back to the Blue Wave project, John Costello, and he was demanding Dublin gets provincial voting rights. He wanted it to be treated as a province. Well, if you want to be treated as a province, if you want to vote like a province, if you want the money of a province, the sponsorship of a province, all the benefits of a province, you can't field one team. And when you go back to the beginning of this, I mean, in 2004, you could go back further, actually, because John Bailey, years ago, when he wanted Parnell Park in the 90s to be done up, and he told the builders he had no money, but he'd get it sorted by Christmas. And him and Bertie Ahern were turning the sod in the middle of the pitch when Dick Spring pulled the plug on it. And years later, when Bertie made it to the top of the door, I remember Sean, to the top of the tree in Irish politics. I mean, I remember Sean Kelly telling me that basically John Bailey didn't even have to knock on his door. It was always open for him. And that started the funding. And it went against all the GAA's wisdom, because the likes of Peter Quinn and these people had done a review in 2003. And they all said Dublin is actually getting strong on its own merits now. It needs to be split. But the GAA not only didn't split Dublin, they funded them through the hilt. And it's created a beast so big. I mean, I think that the National Statistics Office figures show that by 2030, 40% of the Republic of Ireland will live in Dublin. So obviously that's the market spot, and it's self-fulfilling because they're winning, they're in the big stadium given to them, they have the corporate boxes. So they're getting all the sponsorship money. They're fielding one team, they're getting all the GAA money. And not only that, I mean, if you start funding other people less than Dublin, but a little bit more than they're getting now, you don't catch up with someone way ahead by going slower than them. And for the likes, it's been less bad for counties in other provinces because the likes of Cavan or Monaghan or Donegal or Tyrone, they start each year going, by Jesus, we can win an Ulster Championship. Mayo, Galway, Roscommon can say, by Jesus, we can win a Connacht Championship. And they've something to aim for. And they come out of that, whichever one of them does, with a bit of confidence and a bit of momentum. Now, granted, they almost always usually fail against Dublin also, just by less. Whereas if you're in Kildare or Meath or Offaly or Laois or Westmeath, you start the year going, what the Jesus have I to train for? I can't lift a trophy. And I think it was in the 8 years before Dublin's funding started, 6 teams won the Leinster Championship. Dublin weren't one of the ones who won it twice. Kildare and Meath both won it twice. Dublin, Westmeath, Laois and Offaly all won it. It was the most competitive championship in the country.
Yeah.
It was selling out. The funding starts, and now Dublin are unbeatable. I mean, the Leinster Championship is a laughing stock. But had Dublin been in Ulster or Connacht and were given that funding, they would have dragged everyone else down slowly to the point that people just gave up and their best players weren't fielding. And it hurt Leinster more. But remember Paul Caffrey telling me, he said, he took over in 2005, I think, and he said his initial objective was to start winning Leinster, from there to absolutely annihilating Leinster, from there to winning All-Irelands, and then to annihilating teams in All-Irelands. And look, they're not going to win every All-Ireland, but if you get a year like last year every 5 years and Dublin win the other 4 or win 7 out of 10 in a 32 county competition, I mean, is everyone else supposed to celebrate when one other team wins every half dozen years? Are they supposed to keep interest? And also, are they supposed to pay to see their own county humiliated time after time so that money can go to the team that's humiliating them?
Yeah, Hugh, it is fascinating stuff. And I was talking to Ray Ellen, obviously the Westmeath footballer, there before Christmas, and he was kind of questioning his future with the team. And in fairness, he made a very good point. Like, would you rather go down as just a poor GA player, or would you rather be a lad that makes a stamp for his county and bits and pieces? And I posed the question to him saying, right, Ray, you know, being in Leinster, the competition, Dublin constantly winning it, like that must be tough. But he made a good point. But it really must be very disheartening setting off to start the year if you're Carlow, Westmeath, even me to a degree, really, at this stage, Ewan. Like, nearly, what are you training for?
Yeah, and the training has gone up and up and up. And is it to train? I mean, I remember speaking to Kildare players off the record over the last 4 or 5 years. And it's, do you kind of train hard for 6 months to lose by Dublin to 17 points? Or do you burst your bollocks for 6 months to lose by Dublin to 14 points? And like the 1 year Kildare got close to them in Leinster, they were, I think it was when Dan Flynn got that great point and we gave it a game for 25 minutes. I think we ended up losing by 9 or 10 points. I think it was double score or double digit defeat. And everyone afterwards, Jesus, that was some effort from Kildare. And I'm thinking back to the days where I was coming out of Croke Park crying because we'd lost to them, and we always lost to them, but it was by 1 or 2 points after a bloody brilliant game. And I think Dublin fans got more pleasure out of that. But you still have this denial of fact. I mean, people will mention, what about the hurling? And if you go through it, I mean, since the funding began in 2004, they've won their first Leinster since 1961, 5 Leinster under-21s, 6 Leinster minor titles, a national senior league, 2 All-Ireland club titles. It's been the greatest period in hurling history in 70 years. And the 70 years before that was because it was country lads based in the capital. The women's footballers, same again. They were only denied a 5 in a row last year by Meath in the final. They've won their only ever 6 titles since 2010. So the money does make that difference. And Dublin losing 1 All-Ireland semi-final, having won a provincial, or losing their first game of the league, or even the first 3 games of the league, because they didn't always win the league under Jim Gavin either, doesn't mean it's at an end. And if it is at an end, we keep being told to follow the Dublin model and John Costello as CEO's model, as if you could, as if every county has 1.2 million people and a sponsorship deal worth $1 million and the national stadium for free and all these things, and all that games development funding. But outside of Dublin's victories at senior level and a couple of super clubs, you begin to wonder what they did. Because all that money seemed to kind of peak there. I mean, for all their population growth, they give out that they don't have enough club grounds. Buy some. They give out that people give their population is booming. Where are all the new clubs? Kildare obviously had Newbridge or Nowhere a couple of years ago because Newbridge is a dump. But when our stadium is a kip, an absolute kip, we were told to play somewhere else. When Dublin Stadium isn't fit for purpose, they're giving Croke Park.
Yeah, that's the main point. That's the main point, and obviously it's a debate that go on forever and ever. And obviously, kind of touching on to some of your own work. Obviously, I'm intrigued by Chaos is a friend of mine. A book that you released not so long ago. So, Ewan, what was the thinking behind that one?
I wanted to look at Conor McGregor. Well, not him so much. I wanted him to look as being representative of one side of modern society, that the kind of angry, anti-culture young white man was getting behind at a time of kind of racial tension in America. And about how he was promoted by media, because I remember the first time he was in the late, I interviewed him, geez, it must be 2011 at this stage, in McDonald's in Dublin. And he just won his first UFC fight. And you know what? He was a lovely fella. You know, a bit of a lad, but a nice fella, very intelligent guy, very polite.
We're talking about Conor McGregor here, aren't we?
Yeah, completely full of himself, but very polite, full of belief rather than full of himself. He was. Yeah. Then a couple of days ago, he went on the or after that, he went on the Late Late Show, and kind of Tubridy had him. He wanted him to say funny things that Tubridy finds funny, and kind of had him acting like a clown. And McGregor started realizing this white middle class audience found this hilarious, and to play this game, and he could make more money. And I think he became that person. I think about a decade later, he kind of pulled back the veil and realized there was nothing behind it anymore. And it was kind of interesting how celebrity works in this age, how everybody wants a piece of it, how the media demand you be controversial, how your fans want you to be more and more controversial. But inversely, when everything you say is controversial, then nothing by the definition of controversial is controversial. But I just found him I found him the man for that time and place of Trump politics, of racial problems in America, of social media and kind of everyone being outraged and everyone being shocked, and the culture war that was beginning at that stage. So I kind of used him to delve into that, and I spent 23 nights in Las Vegas on the trot, and I can see why when you watch those American sitcoms and things, they make jokes about, well, let's only do 2 nights. Because I was a shadow of a man after 23 nights. I'm apologies about this because I'm a disaster. I'm just texting my wife to bring in the charger, or will I run and get it?
One or the other, whatever you think, whatever Sanchez, whatever looks good for media.
I won't. I'm in a pair of GA shorts, so I'll just text her.
You're training, Ewan. Where you're training for Kildare for next year, are
you? Oh dear. Now hopefully she'll do that for me. Yeah. But yeah, so that's what it was about, and it was kind of looking at the circus around UFC and the kind of farce that is, and a kind of one side of that culture divide that was beginning to start up, which kind of in COVID has absolutely grown and grown to the point of this wokeness versus, I suppose, a side that's just fed up of being told you're not allowed to say this and do that and be like this, and everything has to be virtue signaling. So it was kind of at the nascent stage of that. It was enjoyable. It was kind of more a sociological look with a little bit of sport thrown in, because I know very little about UFC other than 2 lads beating lumps out of each other in a cage.
And I have to obviously get your views on obviously Mr. McGregor at the minute. Ewan, obviously he's in and out of the papers, and he does strike me as the kind of fella, if there's a fight coming up, he's committed, he trains for it. But unfortunately, when that man's not fighting, we see the worst of him.
Yeah, I think it's I suppose, do you know what? I try and understand people. Some things cross the line you can never understand, and just you plug that in over there for me. This side. No, this. Well, thank you. There it is. It's like people running around in the studio here. So it is an RTE with the heads poking up. Thank you
for saving the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for saving the podcast, you've been told, Erica. Wonderful. I guess, do you know what? Was it Jamie Foxx I remember listening to talking about hanging around with Mike Tyson and how Mike Tyson was absolutely mental, and they were in a club one night and Mike Tyson started chatting up these 2 girls, and he said, do you want a BMW each? And he gets a BMW dealership opened and blah, blah, blah. And Fox was saying, he said, you can't be that mad and that vicious in the ring and then just go home and drink milk. And it's an interesting one because we cheer and demand. We want this guy to be an animal in the octagon. We want him to train to knock people and choke people unconscious. The media want him to be controversial, so they can have columns about how disgusting he is and how out of control he is, but at the same time kind of love that. And that's always going to end badly. I mean, I guess in this age we build up people to tear them down again. We celebrate them on the way up and talk about them, and we talk at the bar and we fill media with it. And then it gets to a point where we're bored of them. So be it the bar, the media, we say, isn't that guy scum? Isn't that, look what he did. So we bring them back down again. The Americans always have a third chapter of that, which is the redemption story. But I don't think Ireland is bothered with that yet.
By God, we're not, Jim. By God, we're not. And we have to kind of keep pushing on here because I know time for time, because by the time we got this started, so I have another wee gig after this.
Apologies.
No problem at all, Ewan. And obviously, Oisin McConville's book, The Gambler, a book released years and years ago. It was an incredible read. And obviously, Oisin is doing fantastic work at the minute, obviously on the punditry side of things, and we know how good of a player he was. So the idea behind that book, Ewan, and obviously it's probably still selling well.
I think so. And we'll see when the royalties check comes in shortly. But, I remember when I was working in the Sunday Tribune, going up to interview Oisin before, it must have been one of those Ulster finals against Tyrone around 2003 or 2004. Probably 04, because if that was an Ulster final that year, because I remember they played in the semi-final in 03, which was probably the most intense match and atmosphere I've ever been at in my life. But around then, and he got talking about this gambling problem and just completely opened up. And I was on a train back from Newry after it. And he texted me and he said, look, and he'd given me loads of good stuff, loads of great insight for this big interview. And he said, you mind not using that gambling addiction stuff? He said, I haven't told my mum yet. And what could you say? I mean, look, as much as I'm a journalist, you have to respect that people have to live their lives, and how is this going to affect his family if they read it in the paper? So while I was pissed off because I was looking forward to getting it printed, I said, sure. And I texted him a couple hours later and I said, when you tell her, would you ever think about doing a book? And he said, yeah, do you want to do it? And that's literally how it came about. And smashing guy, smashingly honest, always had huge time for Oisin. And you know what? I mean, he's a hell of an analyst. I mean, in an era when you turn on League Sunday and look at Pat Spillane seeing the Clare result and go, Cusick Park's a tight pitch, and David Tuberty or something, they only same words every year from someone who's never seen Clare play football. Yeah. I mean, the depth of knowledge Oisin brings to it is fantastic. It's the sort of thing you get seen done in kind of Premier League football or Champions League, this in-depth knowledge of every player, their strengths and weaknesses, game plans, how to adapt to it. And it's just such good watching. I can see why he's in such demand, because he's kind of, he owns that now. And he's one of the very few who can do it.
Definitely. Obviously, the book itself, obviously, that's a very brave story for you, Oisin, to come out with, and obviously the high-profile nature of him, the high-profile nature of his career and everything. And so, was it an easy book to write? Was it a bit intense at times, or were you surprised by Oisin's honesty?
No, he told me early on that one of the things the psychologist had said to him was that you have to admit your faults. And if you're up to it, there's no better way to do that than in public. And it was something I found with Kenneth Egan afterwards, actually doing his book, The Boxer, as well, about all his mistakes and his alcoholism, that for some people, it's part of the healing process to completely outright admit your problem to the world, and then you can kind of rebuild yourself. That's the final part of tearing you down. When you're doing something like that, I guess the only time I would have said to Oisin and Kenny, like they'd be telling you stories, and you kind of go, well, you do know your mum is going to be reading this. And that's the only, you're kind of wary of other people as much as you think, Jesus, this is great stuff and I'm looking forward to putting this down. And it kind of, when you get stuff that juicy and someone is that honest and someone is that open, it kind of writes itself in a lot of ways. It's when someone is telling you bullshit and there's nothing to it and it's boring that it becomes a struggle to fill the pages. And then you have to try and kind of get artistic and kind of make the mundane look well written or something at that point. Yeah. But no, I mean, Oisin was savage. I mean, he was just up front. He wanted to tell everything. Which, again, I mean, it's a long time ago now, but I mean, just I've always had a space close to my heart for Oisin. He was just a lovely guy to work with. Definitely.
And another topic I really wanted to discuss with you. Obviously, we were laughing at the start. We did give you a Cavan man a couple of years ago. The transfer didn't exactly go to plan. I was reading your tweets years ago in bits and pieces, and I think you're talking about a couple of months ago, Shawnee Johnson's transfer to Kildare. Ewan a couple of years ago. We all know about the ins and outs of it. It's probably around 10 years ago now, really, at this stage. But what was your take on all that madness, Ewan?
Oh, it was farcical. I mean, it was absolutely. And as a Kildare man, I mean, I remember one Kildare player senior Kildare player, on the bus back from a match. They'd lost to Monaghan in the league around that time, and I'd been writing left, right and centre how disgraceful this was. And he rang me on the way back and told me, would you ever go easy at your own county? And I said, that's not my job. And I said I'd go easier in my own county if they weren't making fools of themselves. Yeah. I remember Kieran McGeeney eyeballing me out of it around that time as well at a press conference after a championship match in Croke Park. It made a mockery of the game. I kind of felt sorry for Shawnee because it became such a big deal, and he was used in it. And ultimately, I think it was what sadly for me ended Kieran McGeeney's tenure in Kildare, because I thought he brought an intensity we hadn't seen since Mako, and before that since Christ, probably the 70s. They got it really badly wrong, and they didn't know when to say we're wrong and stop. And it cost Shawnee a lot of flack, made Kildare look terrible, ended McGeeney's time, made the rest of the players look terrible. And by the time he actually got to play intercounty football for Kildare, I think it had taken such a toll on him. He wasn't the brilliant whippersnapper corner forward you'd seen.
Absolutely. Obviously, like the ins and outs of him, obviously did cause a lot of headaches for people, and obviously the game did happen. Cavan did play Kildare in the back door in 2012 in Breffni Park. Shawnee kicked the point against Cavan, so I don't know where you're about that day, Ewan.
I think I was stuck. I think it might have been a Saturday qualifier, and I was stuck in the office in the Tribune, but I think the father was at it, and he said, Jesus, the abuse Shawnee got, but I understand it. We'd have done the same. Yeah. Although I always remember another match up in Breffni Park years before that in the league in it must have been the mid-90s. And we had another forward called Stuart Mackenzie Smith around that time. And it was always weird coming from Kildare to go closer to the border around that time, because I remember one guy roaring out in the crowd, he called him, will you get that double-barreled bastard off the pitch? Yeah, no, the transfer definitely did scratch a lot of heads. And I suppose kind of regarding that transfer, like, did you feel it did? I know Kieran Whelan was very strong in his views when he was talking about it, but did you feel maybe the spirit of the GA really kind of took it out of it? And obviously, like, I know Shawnee was very headstrong and he got the transfer over the line eventually. He swung the hurl, as you said a couple of minutes ago too, so it really was a mess, Ewan. It was a mess. I mean, and had we won with him, it would have detracted hugely from it. It would have been, oh, there's the boys who won because they have this fella. There's the boy. And we would often talk in the past about kind of Larry Tompkins and Shay Fahy, but Shay was, I think, an army man. He was stationed in Cork. Larry Tompkins was our own fault because we wouldn't pay a flight back from New York back, and it cost us badly, you know. So they were our own fault, whereas this was us trying to engineer this, that. And I'd rather lose playing close to playing by the rules as much as you can, than just turning the whole country against you, and rightly so, because you're making a joke of a system that's there to make this sport as brilliant as it is. And if everybody did that, and everybody took that attitude that Kildare did that time, can you imagine the state of the game?
Do you know who initiated the transfer? I still don't know who came up with it or who.
I'd imagine it was Kieran.
Yeah.
I'd imagine it was Kieran saying we need another forward, knowing Shawnee, he's not happy, get an apartment up there, swing a hurl, get him out there, and presuming this would all go without an eyelid being batted. Whereas, I mean, and he became, McGeeney being so headstrong, even when it was doomed to fail, and even when all that pressure was kind of crushing Johnson, and he wasn't going to be the player, McGeeney just couldn't turn around and say, and hold his hands up and go, look, we were wrong.
Absolutely, and absolutely. And obviously, kind of touching on the state of affairs at the minute, obviously the league is back at full earnest, and we kind of seen Dublin obviously get bet by Armagh at the weekend, and obviously there's lots to be played before the All-Ireland final and Leinster Championships and everything going with that, Ewan. But are you happy maybe with the standard of football at the minute? Because obviously I know Tyrone did nip in and win an All-Ireland last year, but you know, the state of play at the minute, what's the verdict on it all?
I thought it was decent at the weekend, probably more exciting than anything else, but then we're 6 weeks after Christmas. There's only been a couple of pre-season games. It was still January, the weather was crap. I think to get 3 draws and a shock is great. Dublin looked really rusty. Armagh looked so good that you wonder, Jesus, this is very early, but then how do you go about that? Mayo and Donegal will just want to stay up, as will Kerry. Kildare will be fighting for their lives. Dublin will come good. And I mean, do you know what? I think with Division 1, given the standard, I think it's probably more important to stay up, because there's such a drop off, with the utmost respect to your Corks and your Offaly's and whoever else in Division 2. that going into summer, especially in a shortened calendar, you need to be playing the best, and especially with Tier 2, you're not going to get your easier draws again. So I think for everyone, it's more important to stay up and get those games and get their young players playing at that level and that intensity and getting used to it, so that when summer comes, they're at a higher level. And that's going to be the interest. I mean, I don't think any team that can win the league really cares about winning the league. But who goes down? I mean, Kildare are probably still the favourites. Armagh's 2 points. They would have been favourites before. Is it a Donegal, a Mayo, or Dublin in trouble? Monaghan, Tyrone. I mean, it's wide open. I mean, and so it's gonna be great. It's gonna be the big pity is. I mean, I was really looking forward to another weekend of it, but it's a hurling weekend. So even on GEA Go, I can't get to see a lot of these games because Christ, the Dublin hurlers are playing. So we'll stick them on live, and we can't miss them.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's football on this weekend as well, though. There is still games on this weekend.
There's 2 on Saturday, I think.
Yeah.
And the weird one, I mean, Down are on live.
Yeah.
2.
Yeah.
I think Down Galway maybe. There's only one Division 1 game on at all, I think, in football.
Yeah.
Which is on the Saturday. Then Sunday, there's nothing. Kildare up in Donegal. There's no sign of that.
Yeah.
So it's a pity because it is so competitive. It's kind of a pity with some of the derbies. Maybe you can't have them if Kildare are playing Dublin. It can't be on a Friday night.
Yeah.
It's kind of a pity. Is it Virgin Sport or Air Sport have gone to the wall? That there isn't another one that can show these games, or RTE do both channels rather than showing some bloody John Wayne film or Ryan Tubridy rerun or whatever. The Christ, but yeah, sport isn't for everyone. So I guess I'm being greedy.
Kildare, Ewan, Johnny Doyle, Anthony Rainbow, Glenn Ryan, Paul Galvin. What's the verdict on all? Is it going to happen for you this year?
If we stay up, it will have happened for us this year, regardless of what happens thereafter. That's our limit, and if we can stay in Division 1, that's a good year. Do you know, it's a huge improvement. I mean, Glenn, people thought his time had come and gone, but we had. I mean, I have huge respect for Cian O'Neill, but he kind of brought the tactical side to it. Jack brought the mercenary side to it. Whereas Glenn, do you know what? Sometimes in this era of tactics, and since Jimmy McGuinness and James Horan, and then you Jim Gavin about how they're revolutionising the game, and you know how to move from the 14-man defence into counter-attacking and all this. That's fine when you're at that level trying to win it all. When you're at Kildare's level, we just wanted to put the bloody steel back into it a little bit, to have lads bursting their bollocks. And I know since early December or whenever they were allowed, I mean, I know they've been out running the Curragh twice a week. Old school stuff that Glenn would have done under Micko, and that probably showed against Kerry in the last 15 minutes. It won't as the year goes on. But we were just kind of glad that for all the mistakes, and maybe the kick passing is still poor and some of the shot choices aren't great, just to have guys again committed and putting bodies on the line and dying with their boots on. If that attitude can keep us up, then regardless of what happens in the championship, it's a good year, because we've a really young team. Like Jimmy Hyland's going to be a superstar. The other corner forward's a young fella. There's quite a few young fellas from the under-20 team that won the All-Ireland are coming in now. And if they can have 2 or 3 years in a row of Division 1 football, of playing Dublin and Donegal and Mayo and Tyrone and these gritty, bloody teams, that will bring them on a long way, because it's just no good if you have ambitions of winning a provincial title at this stage. It's no good winning in Tullamore by 3 points and beating Clare by 4 and drawn with Cork. I mean, it just doesn't do it. Then you get into championship, and as we've seen with Kildare, you just get steamrolled. It's like a kind of a second division club playing Man City in the FA Cup or whatever else. It's just such a level up that you can't do it. So, no, I mean, I grew up with those guys as my absolute heroes, and Glenn is the dogged warrior, and Johnny is the classiest forward we had, and Dermot Earley is just glorious for a few years there, especially when he was kind of a box-to-box player, and Anthony Rainbow. And Galvin is a weird one. But I've heard, I don't know how he fits in with that diet. Do you know what? As a player, he died with his boots on, but the stuff I've heard from his coaching is a bit more yoga-esque and kind of, spiritualism and this sort of stuff. And I don't know how, but I'll just trust that Glenn and the lads know what they're at around that.
And very last question, where the hell are Kildare getting the money for these 4 gentlemen?
Well, I'd imagine Glenn is taken very little. I'd imagine Rainbow, Lacey's in there. I mean, I think you can't say for years that Kildare need to get homegrown managers. We used to get this in Dublin, as if every Dublin hurling manager wasn't a mercenary being paid a fortune. They'd go, you'd have more money if you got homegrown managers. Well, then we have homegrown managers, and I'd imagine they're doing it for relatively little, compared to the likes of Jack before and going back and McGeaney and whatever else. I'd imagine, and plus, I mean, I'd say they're just doing it for expenses, which for Glen Ryan from Kildare Town to Newbridge is 7-minute drive across the Curragh. So I think finally we're back to a management team doing it for the love of it. I don't know where they're getting the money for Paul Galvin, by the way. I don't know, maybe they've a sponsorship deal with a 3-piece suit company in Naas or something, or make them happy out. But no, I mean, I wouldn't be. I mean, we're going back to basics here. We're going back with our own working class heroes in charge, and started well. But look, Kildare's problem has always been consistency as well. The one time, I suppose Cavan will know this too, you get a result and you get your hopes up, and by Jesus, the next day you fall flat and it's back to square one. So let's see how the weekend goes, because if it's bad weather again and it's a long way to Ballybuffet, I think, or I hope they might be playing it in Father Tierney Park, the other place, which is worse again. But yeah, I mean, that if we get within 2 or 3 points, you'd kind of go, yeah, that's 1 point from 2 and 2 good performances. We'll take that.
So much more I'd love to ask you. The clock's running us. But Ewan, thanks so much for joining me this week. And of course, this podcast is brought to you by orgarich.com and Atak.ie. Use the promo code JMac podcast to get 15% off orgarich.com and get the best skins, gloves, equipment on Atak.ie. Be attack minded. And if you like what you're seeing, like and subscribe on YouTube, because the support has been absolutely fantastic so far. Ewan, thanks a million. Guys, check out Ewan's podcast. Think for yourself. It's a great listen. Ewan, thanks a million, sir.
Anytime. Pleasure. Take care of yourself. Up the breath, me.